studios in Washington, D.C., this is Charlie Rose.
Tom Friedman is here for our annual conversation about America and the world. He is a foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times. He has won 2 Pulitzer Prizes for reporting. His 1989 book, From Beirut to Jerusalem, won the National Book Award. Tom travels the world meeting individuals and measuring ideas and events that shape our time. We're taping this conversation on December 17, 1997, at the Washington studios of Bloomberg Television. Mr. Friedman just returned from Bangkok, Thailand, the byline for several of his recent columns, and I am pleased to have him back on this program to look back and to look forward. Welcome back, sir.
Great to be here, Chuck.
It's great to have
Thank
you.
you.
How many of these trips in a year do you take? I've seen Russia as a byline, I've seen Thailand, I've seen so many other bylines. How much of your time on the road?
I must have done about a dozen this year, something close to that. I haven't totaled it up, but roughly 1 a month, I would say, I average, Charlie. And this trip was typical. I went to Bangkok and to Malaysia for a week.
Right.
It's a long way there. It's 28 hours from Washington and 28 hours back. But it was just a case, you know, let's face it, I have the best job in the world. I mean, somebody has to have it, and I've got
Why
it.
not
And
you?
you don't. I mean, let's be honest,
right.
okay?
And I'm jealous.
And I have the best job in the world. I am a tourist with an attitude,
Yes,
okay?
you are.
Tourist with an attitude. It's the greatest job in the world. And so sometimes I can't contain myself. So I was in Moscow, you know, for a weekend conference outside of Moscow at a dacha, and I was watching everything going on in Southeast Asia, and I just said, I got to be there. I've got to go out there and touch it and feel it firsthand. You know, if you don't go, you don't know, and you always learn so much when you go.
How do you go when you go? I mean, you get on the plane and you arrive, you take your notebook, you take your tape recorder.
Right.
Who do you call, and do you get access to almost everybody you want to see?
It's a good question. You know, first of all, let me say on this trip, why Thailand and say Malaysia, not Korea and Japan? Because that was, so where do you go? Well, the first point I wanted to say was, I wanted to go to the place, I wanted to go in my own mind, I said, to the first domino. Okay, this Asian thing has been a series of falling dominoes. So I thought, you know what, I want to go to the first domino, Thailand, where it all started on July 2nd, and ask the people there, okay, it's calmed down here now. Korea's still roiling, Japan's still roiling. How do you guys understand what happened? What do you think happened here? Because I think that's very important for the long run. So I go with a question, and I go with a particular reason. What I did in the case of Thailand, we have a bureau there. And so I asked them, you know, who's smart, who's interesting. I don't really need to see government officials, don't really go out of my way to do it, because I really just need interesting people who can open up the society to me. And I interview everyone from, you know, a woman selling cigarettes on the street in Bangkok who tells me she owns stock in the in the Thai Stock Exchange. And she knows just what the stocks she owns, which is interesting. To, you know, to mutual fund managers, to diplomats, to government officials, to you know, the unemployed. So I try to get a range of people. And then once I'm there, it usually takes me about a day to figure out what the column, I mean, I go with an idea and then I say, okay, this is interesting. What am I hearing from all these people? When I ask them, what do you think happened to you? What are they telling me? They're saying that we think we had kind of a governance problem here. That is, you know, we had all this money coming in. We'd plugged into the global economy, but we really didn't have the institutions here to manage and regulate that flow. We had a software problem. We had the right hardware, you know, free markets, but bad software. And so that was quite interesting to me. The overwhelming response of, I found from taxi drivers to, you know, people in the market was, mea culpa. We kind of we kind of messed this thing up ourselves. There was not that blame somebody else, and there was a real kind of inward looking.
They tried to take it too fast?
Not take it, well, that they
didn't have the regulations.
They didn't have the institutions, they didn't have the regulatory controls, they didn't have the government efficient. One of the problems in a rapidly emerging market like Thailand is all the talent. If you've got any brains and talent, boy, you're in the market. Somebody's ready to pay you a huge amount of money to, you know, be in their fund or manage their properties or what. So all the good people left the government. It's a real problem. They don't have a wide elite like we do, where you can have, you know, people in and out, it's no problem. So a lot
they
of
left the government to get their share of the Thai dream.
Exactly. And so they left. There was like with the last one out, please turn off the lights. You know, and so the government really was peopled by less than competent, less than the best in the
I don't want to go to Russia now, but is that the same issue in Russia, which is they didn't have the institutions and the foundation to take advantage of the transition from a planned economy to a free market economy?
Absolutely.
Same issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Playing out differently.
Charlie, we know what it's like to go from a free market to communism.
Right.
After all, that's what Russia went through, roughly free market. Into 1917, they went to no one's got any experience in going from a planned communist economy back to a free market. So that's the first problem that the Russians have. The second problem they have, and Thailand and Russia are good examples of this, I believe that we do live in an interesting world today where everyone has roughly the same hardware. Yeah. Free markets. Russia has free markets, and Albania has free markets, and Thailand has free markets, and Mexico has free markets, and China has free markets, and Hong Kong. We all have the same hardware. The question is, who's going to get the software to go with it, to regulate it, to keep it relatively stable, free, and fair? Okay. He who gets the software is going to move, I believe, inexorably in the direction toward a society based on more rule of law and maybe ultimately democracy. He who doesn't get the software is going to move in the direction of free market kleptocracy. Okay, mafia states, basically. Thailand's moving in the direction of free market democracy. Russia's moving in the direction of free market kleptocracy. And I believe that's going to be the big divide in the world we go into. No more communists and Democrats, but kleptocrats and Democrats.
And what will make the decision, and how will the decision be made as to whether they go to free markets with the software, right, or they go to
the
corruption and dominance by the mafia?
It's a question that I'm wrestling with, which the way I put it in my own head is, Daddy, how does software get built?
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
It's a real, because it took us 200 years to get the software we've got.
And that's the big question, is whether the people have the patience for it to come on stream.
Exactly, because it took us 200 years. As I said in a column the other day, I was asking a diplomat there, I said, well, aren't we asking them to do in 20 years what took us 200 years? He said, no, you've got it all wrong. We're asking them to do it in 1 year. Okay, that's really what a lot of these demands of the IMF are about. How does software get built? Well, one way it gets built is the way it's getting built in Thailand today. Thailand is the nail, and the markets are the hammer, okay? And they just hammer you, okay, until you get your governance right. That's one way software gets built. I'll tell you another way I've discovered this past year. It's always our annual talk. So what did I learn this past year? That software gets built. It gets built through a process that I call glovolution and glovolutionaries. I discovered this in Indonesia last summer. It's very interesting. I met in Indonesia a class of people I'd never met before, 30 and 40-year-olds, who I would say want to get rich but don't want to be corrupt. And they want democracy, but they are afraid to go in the street and die for it. Right. Okay. So what is their strategy? Well, they know in Indonesia there's never going to be revolution from above, not with Suharto and his clique in charge. They're terrified of revolution from below. So their whole strategy is revolution from beyond. That is to link Indonesia in every way they can with global institutions, okay, whether it's the WTO or ASEAN or the IMF or Coopers and Lybrand or McDonald's, okay, that the more you link up with these global institutions, you import into your own society rules-based systems and standards that you will never get from above, that you're terrified of generating from below. I call it glovolution and the glovolutionaries. I'll give you an example from Russia, Charles. It's apropos of your question. I was in Russia a couple of weeks ago, as you said, I was in a group with a major American CEO, and we were talking about what is the problem in Russia. No one pays taxes. None of the corporations there pay taxes. And he just said this to me offhand. He said, it was interesting. I was talking to a Russian company today, and they said, we'd like to partner with you. And the first question this American CEO asked his Russian potential partner was, do you pay your taxes? I said, well, no. He said, well, we can't partner with you because we're audited. We're a public company in America, and you not paying taxes would show up on our audit. Yeah. So that's global, because now this Russian's got to think to himself, okay, I can only get ahead
if I play by the rules.
If I partner with this American company. But to partner with an American company, I've got to play by global standards and rules. Right. I call it glovolution. It's another way software gets built.
And can software be built without that kind of input? I mean, what's the other direction if it's not by a kind of glovolution?
Right. Can it be built by internal forces? You know, one would hope, and I think it will be to some extent. Again, what we're seeing in Thailand. It's very interesting. Thailand for several years was debating a new constitution, much more liberal, democratic constitution with real accountability for ministers and guarantees of 12th grade education. It was languishing. You know, the conservative parliamentarians didn't want it. The army didn't want it. Boom! This crisis hits. Suddenly, the king says, "You know, I think we need that constitution." The army says, "You know what? That new constitution is not such a bad idea."
Yeah, we need rules.
We
and
need
regulations.
exactly.
Did the impact of globalization affect, as the lady you said who was selling whatever cigarettes or whatever?
Yes.
Did the revolution, the global revolution, affect people at the grassroots level in Thailand, in all these countries, or was it simply limited to a very few?
I think the first thing you have to say about
globalization,
right, absolutely. The first thing you have to understand about globalization, I believe, is that it's not global. That it only applies to a certain economic elite in most of these emerging markets. They tend to be the dynamic economic force in these societies and the dynamic political force, but it's only a certain strata, and therefore its roots are not very deep. And there can be a real backlash to it. I wrote a little bit about that from Thailand.
I say that because I met a former foreign minister on my trip to Tehran, and I said, "Can you make the case against free markets?"
Right.
And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I can make the case because it's not touching enough people."
Right, absolutely.
And a lot of the people in Russia are better off the way things were than they are today.
Right.
So Yeltsin was not able to bring it on fast enough and get
I think
it done.
that's a real problem.
And that's a real problem.
Because unless we can democratize globalization, unless we can make people feel that they own it and benefit as well, you're going to get huge income gaps, huge social cleavages in these countries, and it's not going to be stable. It's
And
not
that's
going
the
to be
old argument
sustainable.
against capitalism right there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real problem, and I think about that a lot.
When I drove in this morning, the first question I was going to ask you was, have you seen any big ideas emerge this year that you didn't see last year? Last year, at this table, we talked about globalization, and you talked about globalization with a human face and a safety net that you thought was essential.
Yes.
And that somehow speaks to some of the issues we've... But is there anything emerged with respect to understanding globalization? And is it simply the idea we've been talking about, which is you've got to have the software, the hardware is not enough? Is that the big idea, or is it something else?
I'll tell you what's on my mind, okay? My new thought for this year, and I'm going to write about this before the end of the year somehow. I was in Doha, Qatar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not many
2
people were
months
there.
ago, okay? A couple months ago, I was in Doha, Qatar. And I was staying at a hotel, and outside the hotel...
This is for the conference.
No, I was there before actually, yeah.
They and you kept writing all those columns about who's going to attend.
Right, exactly.
And not many of them did.
That's right. And outside this hotel, there's a beautiful corniche in Doha, which is a sidewalk, beachfront on the Persian Gulf. And they've done just a beautiful job of it, the Qataris, in building palm trees, wonderful sidewalks. You see Qatari women in black robes there, and men ululating at them, families out. It's wonderful, authentic. If there's an authentic Persian Gulf scene, it's this, and done with great taste. And I walked there in the morning, and I was saying, this is so nice. They've done such a nice job with this. I'm really, really enjoying this. And then I came upon Pizza Hut. I just thought, oh no. What is that doing here?
No,
oh, jeez.
No disrespect to Pizza Hut. It's
That's
just
right,
not the
but
place.
It's just, what is that? And what's worse, Charlie, it was crowded.
Yeah.
Okay, now fast forward. Last week I'm in Kuala Lumpur. All right, I'm staying at the Shangri-La Hotel in exotic downtown Kuala Lumpur.
You walked outside.
I throw open my curtains, and the building next door has a 2-story high picture of Colonel Sanders on it. All right. And I said, oh, no, yuck. What is he doing here? And by happenstance, I went to see the Deputy Prime Minister in Malaysia, and the head of Kentucky Fried Chicken Malaysia was there, waiting in the anteroom with me. So I couldn't resist interviewing him because he was there for economic reasons, worried about they import the chickens or whatever, the potato, French fries. And we started talking, and I tried to express this, that I said, what is it that people like about this? Because who am I to say, hey, you shouldn't have Pizza Hut, if people like it. And we always have to remember two things, and this is really what he explained. People who are going to his restaurants, they're not coming from some quaint bistro, all right, some charming neighborhood bistro. They're coming from a dirty, fly-infested street stall. They come to this place, it's clean, it's standardized, has clean bathrooms. But he said it's more than that. It's also a way of touching America, being part of modernization, there's a whole sort of cultural experience, he said, that goes with it. So people in the villages line up for this. And I thought, well, that's interesting.
They want to be part.
They want to be part of something that's more than just the chicken. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what bothers me about it, of course, is that we already have in this country, America is the most boring country to tour already because everywhere looks like everywhere else. And what's sad to me, Charlie, is that the world is starting to look that way, you know, in the big cities now and even outside them, you know, with the Pizza Hut and the McDonald's and the Burger King on every corner. And really what I've been starting to think about is I'm very sad about that. And I think they're going to be sad about it, too, at a certain level of economic development. And I'll give you a parallel with pollution, okay, because to me this is a different kind of pollution. What happened, I was in Indonesia this summer, terrible pollution. Indonesia is home to the greatest biodiversity range in the world, and it's getting wiped out by this development. Now, there will be a point that Indonesia will develop. There'll be an Indonesian middle class. They will say, we want to preserve the environment, okay, and they will clamp down, and Indonesia will have clean air again, just like Japan went through. Problem is they'll have clean air again, but the biodiversity will be gone. My fear is that the same thing is going to happen with these countries culturally. They're going to wake up 20 years from now and say,
they're going to be westernized?
what happened to that stall, that lovely Malaysian sidewalk life that we had? It's gone, and they're going to want to recapture it, just like we want to recapture it now. They opened a corner bakery near me, something called the Corner Bakery.
I know, yeah.
But what we've discovered
or the
here,
country kitchen.
Exactly. Oh boy, I go to the Corner Bakery and I love it, and it feels like a corner bakery. The problem is there's no corner with it. Okay, there's no community behind it.
That's right.
The biodiversity that really gives a corner bakery the sense of being part of a community. Hey Doc, hey Mom, hey Joe, it's gone. The Corner Bakery next to me is in a mall. All right, and what I fear is they're going to wake up. Okay, and we're all going to wake up in 10, 15 years and discover, yes, they're going to want to go back to their roots and their traditional Malaysian way of eating and whatnot at some point, I suspect. Yeah. But something's going to be missing. And if you ask me what is my thought for the year, it's what can I do now to forestall that process? You know, I was talking to an American banker who
Is that like forestalling technology, though?
No,
There's nothing you can
I will
do
tell you,
to stop something that's
here's
rushing forward like
here's
that?
what I was talking to an American businessman in Europe last week, and he was saying how much he loves to go to southern France. You know, small farms, small towns, Tuscany shops. It's great. Well, the reason southern France is like southern France is because Germans, through the EU, subsidize French agriculture. Yeah. All right? They pay that Provence will have the structure that it has, that we then enjoy. So that becomes part of our wealth. Because after we'd feel much poorer. I feel impoverished when I go to Malaysia and all I see is Burger King. They don't, but I have a feeling they will in 20 years. We would all feel much poorer if southern France weren't southern France, but was just one big farm like Kansas is or Iowa. It'd be much more economically efficient, but our lives would be poorer. So what I'm thinking about now is how do we frame, because economists would say it makes no economic sense, Charlie. Forget about it. Okay, they got to go the way of the big farm, just like we did. Right. This little farms, little shops, little villages, forget it, out of here. Okay, but why should that be? Why can't we make it part of the range of choices we have in society?
So when you consult,
we want to preserve this.
So when you consult the smartest people in the world, as you travel around and ask them, is it possible? Do you get any optimistic answers?
Not yet, but this is where I want to go in my own thinking, in my own. I want to put this out more. You know, I was talking to my friend Michael Sandel just this morning from Harvard, and Michael's been on your show, and he was pointing out to me actually that in his book he actually wrote about something called the anti-chain store movement in this country back in the 30s and 20s and 30s, and that the argument then was, well, let's have a tax, you know, on these stores that will then help, you know, preserve a tax structure, at least that will help preserve this other form of economic activity and the life that goes with it. I don't know if that's the way. All I know is I'm not ready to just lie down and let them pave paradise.
Here is the other question about this. I mean, it's not the same. And I'm interested, I want to explore this later in this conversation. It is, how is the world viewing America now that it is the superpower?
Right.
Is America, in a sense, becoming isolated? Is there a kind of rebellion against what's considered the arrogance of power by America? And as our culture pushes itself out there, are people saying, is this what America's all about? And if so,
It's a good thought. And it's another thing I've learned this year, I would say, which is that, I think I've said this to you before, globalization, for better or for worse, tends to be Americanization in many respects.
That's why the French don't like it.
That's right. It wears Mickey Mouse ears, it eats Big Macs, it drinks Pepsi or Coke, and does its computing on an IBM computer with Windows 95. For us, it's the most natural thing in the world. For the rest of the world, it's not so natural in varying degrees. What I've really sensed out there, you were just in Tehran. I was there a year ago, and I stayed in a hotel in Tehran where above the front door, it said "Down with USA."
You don't see that much anymore.
Yeah, it wasn't though a banner. It wasn't graffiti. It was tiled into the wall. Now listen to what the Iranians have started to call us lately. It's no longer the Great Satan. They don't call us that anymore. They call us the capital of global arrogance.
Yes.
Guess what, Charlie? That's what the French call us.
I know.
That's what the Japanese call us.
So the French and the Japanese and the Iranians are part of the same mantra.
Right, and look what Saddam Hussein has done. Saddam Hussein in Gulf War I in 1990, he played I am the Arab Robin Hood, stealing from the Arab rich to give to the Arab poor. That's not the game.
There's no democracy in Kuwait.
That's right.
We're just going to go in there.
We're going to redistribute income. Right. You listen to Saddam now, he's playing the global arrogance card. The Americans want to tell you and you and you what to do. He's playing a whole different card.
That
he's trying to tap into.
Was flowed throughout the Islamic countries.
Yes.
This idea of America and whether we were becoming isolated, and people would say, "You got to start listening. America has to listen to, the consequences." And you look who's there. The Saudis were there.
Yes.
Our friends were all there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that mood is out there. That mood is out there, and it's powerful.
What's the incumbency and the imperative for the American administration, and how do you calibrate?
Well, look, at some of it we have to
the
understand
reaction. It goes with leadership.
Right. It goes with leadership. It's jealousy of our economic success, and when we're down again, people want to, no doubt won't feel that way as much, and these things do move in waves. But we are in the ascendant at this moment, and it's producing a lot of jealousy. There is no countervailing power, out there that can really challenge this. I just think we have to be aware of it. Unfortunately, the Congress that we have right now is peopled with such a collection of morons who are into really foreign policy as sports. Right. Pass a resolution here, pass a law there. That really exacerbates
examples like tying the repayment of our UN debt into an abortion.
Exactly. Whatever it is, we're going to tell you what your family practices should be, what your banking, should be, and it's a real problem. I think the Congress is a real problem. I have felt for a long time if you took the first 435 names in the Washington, D.C. phone book, you would have a more intelligent collection of people than we've got there.
I actually think that's a whole hour program to do in terms of how Congress is influencing American foreign, whether it's Cuba or where it is because there is.
Some guy's got 500 people in his district, and he just
makes a point and therefore affects what the president can do. The president sort of bemoans this issue. Let me stay with Asia for a second.
Yes.
China. In the new century we're going into, is it going to be about the United States and China? Are they going to be our great competitor or not? And do they have the same restrictions that you're talking about? Institutions that know how to deal in the software.
Well, I'm worried about China for just this reason. People, and I've written several columns about this because, yes, China is not as integrated with the global economy as, say, Thailand, Malaysia, Korea were. So the yuan, the Chinese currency, doesn't have a market, international market for it. So they're not as subject to the hot flows of money in and out. But they will be. But you talk about bad software, you talk about crony capitalism, corruption, under-regulation, man, they got it in spades. People tell you, oh, China, they're different. They're an elephant that can fly. Well, guess what? Elephants don't fly, Charlie. And if we don't help build a parachute for this one to make a soft landing, when this comes down, it's going to make Malaysia and Korea.
But how do we build a parachute? I mean, I see, as you talk about these conflicts, a demand on the United States, and I'm not sure that there's a clear path how to do
it.
It's
a problem. It's a problem because, building software, the American Secretary of State likes to shuttle in an airplane. But to build software, you have to shuttle in a taxi cab. Yeah. You got to go from one ministry to the other, to the stock exchange, to the bank, to the courts, And we are not well equipped to do that. So, but we can talk to them about it. We can highlight this to them. We can say to them, look what happened to your neighbors. If you think you're immune to that, instead of flattering them, instead of telling them that they are an elephant that can fly, say, look, guys, you are going to be subject to the same laws of gravity. Have no illusions about that.
When you look at China, did anything change as a result of the visit here of Jiang Zemin to see the president? We saw one important dissident released to come to the United States. Now there's a little battle as to whether an interview with him can be heard on the Voice of America over there, and so they're very nervous about that. Has anything changed to avoid the kind of collision course they seem to be in?
I think we've taken a little steam out of the
so they're talking.
The tension.
There's a dialogue.
Yeah, there's a more relaxed dialogue for one reason, that they've shown that they can disagree publicly and still go on and pursue the agenda. Whether it's going to get anywhere is a whole other question, and I'm dubious, frankly. But I think there is a little less day-to-day tension in the relationship, and that's probably helpful, at least at the margins.
Moving to Japan, are the best days of Japan over?
I'm always reluctant, to write these people off. I mean, I think that I have a great respect for Japan and the fundamentals of Southeast Asia. Right, this is people full of, they save a lot, they've got a lot of energy. I think their weakness, if there is one, it's in the education area, okay? People with ponytails who don't wear socks are not welcome in the Japanese workplace, okay?
The kind of people that made the computer world.
I read a quote in The Economist magazine last week I thought really captured it well. He said, in Japan there's a saying that the nail that stands up gets hammered. Well, in America, that nail that stands up is driving a Ferrari in Silicon Valley. All right, that's, I thought that was very well said. That's the difference between us. And in this world, where we've moved, from a world where the big eat the small to a world where the fast eat the slow. Yeah. Oh, we're fast, and they're not so fast as they were, and so I think that's a problem that they're going to have to work out. But I wouldn't underestimate that. I wouldn't write them off.
What do you measure, though, in terms of what this has done to their sense of mission and self-confidence?
I had breakfast this morning with a Japanese diplomat, in fact, and there's no question about it. There's a lot of self-doubt, self-question.
A little bit more careful where they step.
Yeah, and because a lot of what they lack, you can't get overnight. Look, you go to Silicon Valley today, it's 50% immigrants. Have you tried to become a Japanese lately? Okay, we're creaming off the best intellectual talent in the world and bringing them to our shores and synergizing all that together and producing
all of this stuff. Are they going back or are they staying here?
And they're staying here, and their kids are staying here. Or if they're going back with connections to us. Right. Okay? Right. Maybe they're going to go back and, God bless them, start a company, but they're still connected with us.
This interview is 24 minutes in. We have not mentioned the word politics yet. Does that mean that the primary force for democratization, the primary force moving the world today is free markets and economics and globalization, not politics, not relationships between nations?
I don't want to generalize. I like to avoid that. No, I want to avoid that sort of, it's all economics. Okay. Or it's all politics.
Just take the temperature of measure it in terms of the relative significance of where it is today versus 15 years ago.
I think these economic forces are very powerful. I don't want to say they reign supreme because there's a lot of factors at work here, but they're very powerful, and I'm not going to ignore them. I think it's very important to see the effect they have in producing political change.
And is there today, among most of the people you talk to, a consensus that the driving force in the world today is markets? You used to say the two most powerful things in the world today were Moody's and the United States.
I think there is a widening recognition of that.
A consensus that this is the locomotive that can't be stopped, even though it has to be
I wouldn't say can't be stopped. I mean, there can be a backlash. There can be a real political backlash for the reasons that we talked about. Okay. The problem with the backlash is that what is the alternative? When we get done backlashing, what do you have? I mean, do you have an alternative economic system that can sustain a way of life you want? I mean,
did you have that you said one time that Lenin would be turning over in his grave if he knew what?
I mean, maybe if you looked at
knew that as all these capitalist things were collapsing, one of the strong institutions remaining was the Communist Party.
That's right, exactly.
Who would have thunk,
exactly, that's right. About Russia, that they would be the one left standing. Yeah. It's like we may be in a situation, Charlie, where South Korea collapses before North Korea. I mean, think about
as
that.
bad as it is in
You know,
North
I mean,
Korea.
I mean, that could be that this wacky Kim Jong-il, you know, has some point. I don't think so. But he certainly has not produced a way of life people want. But these markets are vulnerable to political backlashes if they don't work. You know?
Let me move over to Russia and Yeltsin, who seems to be, I mean, what happens if he doesn't make it? And what does that do to, because you quoted somebody in the Washington Post saying that what's happening in Russia is like a blender with no top. It's just more it's running, the stuff is
spewing out.
You
the
know,
wheels,
the people in power seem to be, you know, in part economic mafia.
Absolutely. You go to Russia today, Charlie, you just feel, you know, the wheels are not on tight here.
Yeah.
You know?
Then who blew it? Did we blow it? Was there no consensus?
I don't think
in
it's,
terms
and you can really
of being able to say, how important is it when the wall came down that the West, in a sense, recognized the potential here?
Right. Absolutely.
And
well, look, let me just say this. I mean, building software for the reasons is a really hard project. Going from a planned economy with no safety net to a free market is a very hard thing to do. And so did we blow it? I don't know. Did they blow it? I mean, they've also got responsibility for it. All I would say is that when we get diverted by idiotic, brain-dead ideas like NATO expansion, when we elevate that to a priority.
Yeah, but you've got a lot of smart people who will come to who debate with you on whether it's an idiotic brain-dead idea.
There are people who will debate, but I'm not sure.
But, well, I mean, Stroke Talbot and people like Madeleine Albright come to the table, and the president,
they're dead wrong.
And
it's going to go
the
down
national
as
security forces at work over there. You think what?
I think it's going to go down as one of the great historical blunders of our time.
Historical blunders of our time?
Yeah. Without question. Without question. That at a time when we could be focusing and should be focusing on building the software of Russia, history will show that we were spending our money hardening and lengthening runways in Hungary. Okay? Hey, they had a vote on NATO expansion in Hungary last year. Did you see that? All 3 people who voted were in favor. They didn't even get 50% of the people out.
But you've been talking to Michael Mandelbaum too much. You really have.
No, this is heartfelt.
You really, it's the biggest political blunder
of the post-Cold War.
Post-Cold War.
Yeah, just incredibly stupid.
Stupid because we could have. I don't understand why.
Stupid because our priorities should be elsewhere. Stupid because it is unnecessary.
Should be where?
On building a democratic system inside of Russia.
How?
Okay.
How should we do? How do we do that? I mean,
look, we do not have. I will grant you, our ability to do it is always going to be limited.
Right.
Okay. But that doesn't mean whatever influence we have, we should not be doing and
why
using
is it
and
either
employing.
Or? Why? I don't understand why it's either or. Either NATO expansion or building democratic institutions in Russia.
Why? Because, first of all, these guys have, we're spending billions of dollars on NATO expansion. It's not like this budget we have is somehow all expanding pie, number one. Number two, we're telling the Russians...
NATO expansion is an economic issue for you?
Partly, absolutely.
Rather than, I mean, the basic issue, for the most part, has been, you know,
NATO
does it
expansion,
threaten the Russians and does it feed their insecurity and et cetera? That seems
NATO
to be the
expansion,
primary argument.
to me, is 2 issues, Charlie. It's an opportunity lost to focus on something else, okay, which is the internal software. And it's an opportunity lost in that what worries me about Russia today, okay, I tend to worry about people who have things that go boom and are aimed at me. They still have 30,000 nuclear weapons. We have signed a START II agreement with them that is languishing in Russia, in part,
because of NATO expansion?
Because of NATO expansion. Because the Russians are saying, wait a minute, are we part of this West or not part of this West? Maybe we should keep a few nukes, even though it doesn't even make sense for us, just to threaten them, because that's all that keeps us relevant. On the one hand, they say you're part of the game, but we're not part of the game, okay? On the other hand, they say we're going to expand NATO right up to the Russian border, right up through the Baltic republics. But you're part of the game.
So, but in the end, then, your argument has to go with the economic with their insecurity, that their feeling of sovereignty, their feeling that the West,
I mean,
that
they're
really,
not part of the. We're not part of the game. Is Russia threatening Poland?
So, what do you say to the Czechoslovakians and the Hungarians and the Romanians and
what I say to them
who say, look, we just became a democracy. We were under the Iron Curtain. We want some protection. Those Russian bears may get bigger.
You're not the only people who became a democracy in the last few years who want protection, number one. Number two is, believe me, if I saw Russia, okay, in any way threatening Czechoslovakia, Poland, or Hungary, okay, I'd bring them into NATO tomorrow. Not only are the Russians not doing that, okay, the Russians couldn't take Chechnya. It was part of Russia, okay? All right, let alone take Poland, all right?
So your argument in the end says they don't have the capacity to do it. Don't worry.
Not only,
so they say,
not only the capacity, but the will to do it.
You just said they got all these big nukes.
Right,
I mean,
aimed at us, not at them.
No, they've said they've changed it. I thought the Russians said we're no longer aiming them at the United States.
That's horse hockey. Okay, you turn a dial 1 degree and they're aimed at us again. My point is very simple. Let's defang them, all right, in ways that threaten us, and that has to do with nuclear weapons. And let's work with them.
Buying all their MiGs so they don't send them somewhere else.
And let's work with them to consolidate democratic reform there, because nothing will protect Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia more than the emergence of a real democratic, stable government in
Is
Moscow.
that still possible? The emergence of a real democratic, stable government in Russia?
I think so. I would not say
Better
it's
than
impossible.
a 50-50 shot, you think?
Yeah, I still believe that you go there, and the direction of events, okay, is still tending in that direction.
And you believe,
as wild and crazy
and
as it is.
you also believe, if I read you well, that Yeltsin is the best card we have.
Oh, absolutely.
That we better pray.
And that's a third reason
that he survives.
Yeah, we're living in a fool's paradise here, because Boris Yeltsin is a big, large figure. Okay, and he swallowed this NATO expansion basically for the time being, for his own reasons. Boy, if we lose him, we are going to look back longingly and ask, did we use our time well while Boris was around to build the kind of Russia we want? Because I'm very worried what happens when he goes. He's a big man.
I think I asked that question earlier. I mean, what happens? I mean, you could have a kind of civil war.
I think you're going to have a real dogfight for power there. You have these huge...
And you don't know where the military is.
All these oligarchy, all these big business industrialists there. Each one will probably associate itself with one military organ.
And there's an instinct in the culture for strong figures.
Leadership. So it's going to be a problem.
While we talk about that I want to talk about Iraq in just a second. But you had in Iraq Primakov playing with his old friend Saddam. Was that the reemergence in any way other than simply a momentary blip of Russia on the world scene?
Well, look, I mean, Russia does have its own interests. I mean, the Iraqis owe them $7 billion.
And they want that back.
And they want that back.
And the best way they can do that is get those sanctions eliminated.
My attitude is, I don't care if you want that back. You know, the threat posed to Iraq, to the global system, okay, is more important for the time being than you getting your $7 billion back. But they do have their interests.
The threat posed by Iraq to the global system.
Right.
Here's what I constantly hear, and you've heard it and I have heard it, is when you talk to the Iranians and you talk to the Iraqis and you talk to people over there about the development of nuclear weapons of mass destruction, we're not talking about biological, we're just talking about the bomb, say. They always say, why aren't you exercised about Israel having the bomb? You don't seem to care about that. What do you say to that?
Well, last time I checked, Israel hasn't put out a death sentence
on
me or anybody else. You know, I mean, Iran has engaged in behavior, proven acts of terrorism that they've been convicted for in courts of law in Europe against their own people. Okay, and when people were ready to do that, all right, not only against their own people, against Israel, against Israeli targets. Okay, you really have to say, are those people you want having a nuclear weapon? I think it's legitimate.
So you make a difference, and you say these are good people, and this is a democracy.
These are people. Israel is a democracy restrained by democratic forces. It has never engaged in these sorts of reprehensible actions.
That argument, though, in there falls on deaf ears when you talk to them, as you know.
I'm sorry.
You also believe
I didn't put the death sentence out on Salman Rushdie. They did,
and they haven't taken it off
that's
either.
Reprehensible. I'm sorry.
Of course it is, but they haven't taken it off.
Right, exactly.
And we don't have leaders who murder their son-in-law by luring him back into the country and promoting all this other kind of stuff. You think it's good policy to leave those sanctions on until that government, A, kicks out or puts a bullet in the head of Saddam Hussein, or until they allow, now I understand the position of the United States government, until they allow the UN resolutions to be satisfied? Which is it?
Look, if there were, I believe Saddam Hussein is the problem, and if there were a way,
not the weapons, he's the problem.
He's the problem. I mean, the weapons are the problem too, but he drives the weapons. Okay, I think he's a uniquely evil figure. I mean, the kind that doesn't come along every day, basically. And he was terrorized a whole country, who's gone to war with 5 of his neighbors. This is a objectively bad guy.
And doesn't return their POWs.
Look, there's no redeeming features to this guy. He's starving his own country.
So what do you do?
Let me just finish. Let me finish. I wish if there were a way that you could eliminate him in an easy way, I think that would be
This is your
the
full
best.
thing, a
Yeah,
bullet in the head.
exactly. You know, I mean,
Argument,
look,
right.
but I recognize that's not easy. It's very difficult. We have laws, etc. Okay, so what do you do? What do you do then?
Well, but
is
stay there
got-
before you say,
okay.
what do you do? We have laws. I mean,
Right.
are you saying that, you know, that we ought to, ignore that law?
Yeah, I
with
wouldn't go.
respect to
Frankly,
Saddam Hussein?
I personally
Forget
would not go out and put on a black tie. Okay, if somebody
but-
ignored that law and eliminated.
But that's
Saddam
agile to
Hussein.
say that.
Right.
But what is if you're the President of the United States
Right.
and you're going to say, well, we're going to defy this law. We're
Right.
not going to listen to this law.
Right.
This threat is like Hitler
Maybe he
was
can't
in
do it.
1933.
Okay.
And we're going to do
Right.
something about it.
Maybe he can't do it, but I can still wish for it.
But what can he do? Is
What
the
can he do?
realistic, which is
Well, I
where you're
think
going.
then short of that, I think
Sanctions?
well, all he can do basically is keep the sanctions on. And
Sanctions
keep
don't
no,
influence- sanctions do
let me
not-
finish. Let me finish.
Okay.
He can keep the sanctions on and keep a level of deterrence up against Saddam that simply says, we may not be able to get every last one of your weapons, but just understand one thing. If you use them, we're going to incinerate you.
Well, that's fine. But
Yeah.
that's one thing to
That's
say.
deterrence.
But I don't think the sanctions are accomplishing much. I really don't.
And maybe they're not.
Because I don't think a despot listens
But
to
I don't.
sanctions.
Yeah, he doesn't. That's clear. But I wouldn't. No, I would not say that. He obviously is trying to get out from under something here.
I
That's
think
why he's doing
using
all
the
this
si-
stuff.
Well, of course he is. You know, but I think
Yeah. Mm.
it's just a rallying cry because he knows that his neighbors are, and he knows that
Mm.
the Russians. It's a resonating issue for them, for all those people
Yeah, but I
to
still.
see them.
I think he's hurting. I think he'd like to get out from under.
Of course
these.
he
Yeah.
would, but I'm not sure it is enough of a coercion for him. It's not enough of a vice
may not be.
so that he will
Right.
change it.
And that's why I say-
and the people of Iran.
Right.
You know,
So then you're left with deterrence.
no,
I-
deterrence is fine, but do you
Yeah.
think he cares about deterrence? I mean, suppose you say,
Oh
he knows,
yeah. I mean, I think he's impressed. You know, by the fact that he knows if he uses any of these weapons, what's going to happen.
Then
to
why
him.
do we worry? I mean, I'm trying to follow this through intellectually.
Right.
Why do we worry? If he knows that if he uses those weapons, he's going to be incinerated, why are we so worrying about he has the weapons?
Because ultimately you can't be sure. It's like any deterrence. You hope the guy gets the message, but with someone like him, you can't be sure.
Yeah.
And it'll be a safer world if we can get at those weapons.
I think it's. I mean, I talked to the Kuwaitis as you have, and I was prepared to have interesting conversation. I said to them as we sat at dinner, "What worries you?" I mean, it's one word: Saddam.
Right,
And
absolutely,
they
yeah.
have reason to
Yeah.
because those troops came into Kuwait City and took their brothers and their sisters and their wives,
Right.
and they
That's
haven't
right.
seen them since.
That's right.
I talked to people who
Yeah.
haven't seen their sons or daughters because they were either raped or they were taken back to,
Right.
back
Yeah.
to Baghdad. They haven't seen them, and you say, what kind of inhumanity is going on here? Speaking of that, let me move to Bosnia. American troops will have to stay there. The president will go, and that's obviously what's coming down the pike. Is that the right decision? And what does that mean in terms of
I think so. I think that we should draw down our troops to the minimum level, that we can.
but without American troops, Dayton doesn't hold.
Yeah, I just think we've come to a point here. Does anyone really want to go back
Right.
to the old situation? This, alas,
Old stuff,
regrettably, is the price I think we're just going to have to pay for American leadership and for stabilizing Europe and giving these people, another 5 years maybe to get their act together. I wish it were otherwise. I don't see any other solution.
Let me stay with this idea. You just said that's the price of American
Right.
leadership. Some will say to you, and you know these people better than I do,
Right.
that while governments might say, I don't want to be part of a Gulf coalition against Saddam, and there are a lot of reasons I don't want to be there. I'm not happy with the peace process. I got to think about my own influence in the region. Lots of reasons you can come forward with to say, I'm not joining you this time. Others will say, while they're saying that with their mouth, their eyes are winking and their brain is saying, please do it, please do it. Is that an accurate appraisal that our friends in the Gulf want us to do something, but they can't say it because they live next door to these people?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure you can generalize. I mean, their feeling is, please do something, but make sure if you do it that it's a total success.
That's right. It's just time you do it.
Because that's why I think their gut feeling is they would rather deter and contain him. I think they feel that is the least cost option.
Speaking of that, Iran. Sanctions. The Iranians said to me, foreign minister on this program 2 nights ago, if the Americans will lift the sanctions, we will respond. Now the question ought to be, what's the deal?
Right.
And we say,
And
take it from there.
That's what I've been advocating all along. I think we should keep the sanctions on. Keep a tight fist of...
Until we get what?
Charlie, let me finish. We should keep the sanctions on, keep a tight fist around their neck, okay? And at the same time, put out a list with those sanctions that says, if you do, we want you to do A, B, C, and D, all right? And if you do that, we will do D, E, F, and G. I want to give that foreign minister the incentive to go back in his internal councils and say, we're no longer in a situation where, we're just talking about talk. If we do A, B, C, and D, we're going to get D, E, F, and G. That's what's missing from our policy. We say, we want you to do all these things, but we don't specify what we're going to do. So that foreign minister has to go back to his councils and say, well, if we do this, I think the Americans will do that. And some hardliner says, you think?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we're going to do all this, we're going to turn ourselves upside down, and then some Yahoo congressman's going to come out and undermine us, okay? No, we're not going to do that. So that's what's missing. I say keep the sanctions on. Yeah. Keep the list of what we want them to do on, but let's add the list of what we're going to do in response. That's what's missing.
Israel, Netanyahu. How much does the failure of the peace process to move forward hurt the United States in trying to play a role in the Middle East and the Gulf?
I think it's a marginal question, but at the margins, it's important. To the extent that America shows that it's willing to use its influence to move this process forward, all right, then Arabs can say to themselves in their own public, at the margins, okay, well, okay, the Americans are doing that on this issue we care about. We've got to work together with them on this. It is unfair to say somehow Israel is responsible for there not being an Arab coalition. That's ridiculous. But it is not unfair to say that if Israel and the Palestinians are moving forward on the peace process, it makes it easier for America to help to build that coalition, even though building that coalition is difficult for many reasons.
You also believe, or you raised this question, does Netanyahu, the prime minister, take the position he does because his coalition forces him to, or because he wants to use the coalition as an excuse? Did I articulate
exactly?
That
and that's well said, and I think that's what we're going to test right
We
here.
don't know?
We don't know.
You know? What do you think? What's your instinct?
I think one of the imponderables about Prime Minister Netanyahu from the very beginning is, what is his plan? Well, you're in the news business, Charlie. You talk to intelligent people all the time. You read the New York Times. What is the Bibi plan?
There is no Bibi plan.
And that's been the problem. And that no one quite knows where he's going, what he's after.
And I think there's no Bibi plan because he either congenitally, or not congenitally,
right.
He deep down doesn't believe in the peace process, A, or B, because he believes in it, but his coalition.
All of the above. Okay. That's the problem.
Let me raise this question with respect to this. Do you believe, therefore, that the way you get around that is you go take this Yossi Belin's plan that he concocted
right.
with
Abu
Abu Mazen,
Mazen.
and that you take it to him, and therefore he can respond to
right.
it. And that plan basically says Israel's settlements stay. Palestinians get most of the West Bank. 90%, 70%, how much? We don't know, but most of it, right? 70%?
70, 75 is not clear.
Okay, 75. And you think that, and the Palestinians get a capital right outside of Jerusalem. That's a workable deal. Likud members say to you, that's a workable deal. Palestinians say, workable deal. What has to happen to make that happen?
Look, we all know what the deal is going to be.
Yeah, right.
Okay, the deal is going to be the Palestinians are going to get some portion of the West Bank, more than 50. Okay, maybe if you talk to Ariel Sharon, maybe it's 51. If you talk to Yossi Beilin, maybe it's 81. Okay,
Does Sharon say 51?
But I don't. Well, he's certainly talking about in this second stage giving back territory.
Well,
so
we 10%. Isn't it?
Okay, 10% more than what they've got already.
Right. Well, they got 27
right,
now.
exactly
that
right.
makes it 37. Right.
Whatever. That's going to be the parameters of the deal. And so the question really is, how do we get there? I think what's missing, and this is what I was trying to signal to Palestinians, is that I know there's an Israeli, what I call 75 for 75, that there's 75% of Israel for a deal around 75, giving back 75% of the West Bank. Is there 75 for 75 among the Palestinians? Because otherwise the Israelis are going to say, are we just talking to ourselves? Right. Why should we tear ourselves inside out if those guys are going to be at 100%? I don't think the Palestinians are at 100%. I think they're realistic and ready for a deal. But the only way to corner Netanyahu, ultimately, is with the Israeli people. The only way to force him to choose is by persuading the Israeli people, by galvanizing that 75%, that there is a Palestinian partner for a serious, secure, and credible compromise on the West Bank. You convince the Israeli public of that 75%, they will corner Bibi. We've already seen that in the Hebron deal. All right? They will do it again.
Just for the benefit of the audience, if 75% you see is the 50% that voted for labor,
right,
and 25% who are security hawks.
Right, who voted for Bibi not because they're against Oslo, but because they want a better Oslo.
Yeah.
And then you have 25% who voted for Prime Minister Netanyahu because they want to kill Oslo.
Right.
And that's his problem. Half his coalition wants a better Oslo, and half wants to kill Oslo.
Why don't the Palestinians do more to convince the Israelis that they're serious about the security business and the terrorism business?
Well, you know, if you listen to them, they'll tell you, they're getting, their brains beaten out all the time by the Israelis on a day-to-day basis. Their economy is choked. It's kind of hard to reach out and touch someone, when you're down and out. I mean, this is what they will tell you, and I understand that. But what I say to them in response is, I understand where you're coming from. I understand your problem. But this is the facts, folks. This guy's got what you want. All right. Now, either you create the political conditions for him to give it back to you, or it's not going to happen. You may can say that's not fair, that's not just. I'm not here to talk about fairness and justice, okay? Because it's not going to be decided by that. It's going to be decided as a matter of politics, okay, and diplomacy. And unless you build the politics for that to happen, and I know that's hard. That's terribly hard when you're down and you're back. I greatly respect that. But if you can find a way, to get around that, I think it's the key to bringing the whole thing around.
Come back to the United States and the big picture. Globalization is a force. We talked about the idea of software, hardware as a force that's new. The idea you have with respect to too much of America's sort of suburban culture out there. I mean, all the impact of franchise and fast foods and all of that. Do you sense here there is the will to lead on the part of political America, and exercise our role around the world to engage that mission?
I think I'm still an optimist about that, Charlie. I think with the right presidential leadership, yes, that the American public will be brought around for reason, not for every, crisis, but for reasonable objectives at a reasonable cost in a wide range of issues. Every time the president goes to the American people on this Bosnia case, and he makes the case. He said, look, here's the problem. Here's why we're critical for the solution. Do we do it or not, up or down? The public basically says, all right, do it. That's what they've said so far. Maybe that'll change.
Yeah, but when he took that chance, I mean, he didn't think that he didn't think the American people were behind him when he took that initiative.
Absolutely.
He thought he was going out front, but he thought that he had to, otherwise it would lead to disaster.
Yeah, but he went out front and he found people to follow. So I'm fairly optimistic about the American people. And I think the Congress is in a different place than the public. I think they're not representative of the basic gut willingness of the public to be involved in issues where we do have a chance to make a difference at a reasonable cost.
And do you think that, for the most part, with some pockets of exception for a variety of reasons, sort of the French explanation, the world wants us to lead. They understand America. They have some respect for American values and the way America has conducted itself, and they want us to lead.
I definitely think they want us to lead. And that's, sometimes they're frustrated with us, sometimes they're jealous of us, sometimes they get angry with our bullying ways, but basically they wouldn't want a world where we're not out there leading. I don't know any European statesman who would tell you otherwise.
President Clinton now, except for, speaking of European statesmen, except for Chancellor Kohl, is the leader with the most experience.
Absolutely.
Does he want to lead?
I think so. When I look at Clinton on foreign policy, for the most part, I see a man who basically wants to do the right thing. I don't see him playing, outside of issues like Cuba and votes, in Florida, I really don't see him playing a lot of politics with core foreign policy issues. I see a man, trying to do the right thing.
But is he responding, or is he engaged by saying, I want to do something, I want to make the world a better place?
I do not think he has a foreign policy mission. No, I've never felt that. It does not engage him like healthcare or education or race at all.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Pleasure to have you here.
Thanks.
Tom Friedman, from our base here in Washington, D.C., our annual year-end look at the world and where the forces are at work. changing this world that we live in. We thank you for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next time.